Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's SFI Pilot webinar, which is about our free choice research learning activity. I am just going to take you through the purpose of today and the agenda after we just do a little bit of housekeeping, which I believe is on the previous slide. Thank you very much. So today you are on mute, and that is because we've got a lot of sign-ups today. So it wasn't feasible to have everybody able to come off mute and talk with us. But you are able to use the webinar functions to chat with us. If you need help with any of those functions, please let us know in the chat box, and we have people on hand who can help you out and get you sorted to participate today. If you are struggling to use the chat function, then you can just reach out to us through our mailbox, and we have somebody who's monitoring that to make sure that everybody can take part. So that's SFI Pilot Learning at defra.gov.uk. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A button to submit those questions. We have a couple of presentations, and then we've got a little bit of time at the end after we've had all of our speakers to answer any questions you have. So do just ask that if you have any burning questions, of course, put them in the Q&A. But if you want to just hold off until we've given our presentations, we might answer any questions that you have. And then we can focus on giving you kind of new information that we might not have covered. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can today. We don't anticipate that our presentations are going to take up all of the time. So we've tried to leave a lot of time to answer your questions at the end. But if we don't get to any of the questions, or if you think of anything afterwards, you can email that mailbox and we'll get back to you. We cannot answer any questions about your agreement, your personal circumstances in delivering the SFI pilot. But if you do have any questions about that, then if you email those two mailboxes that are on the screens, that's SFI Pilot Learning at defra.gov.uk or raw payments at defra.gov.uk, then someone will be able to help you out with that. So I think that's all of the housekeeping. If we move on to the purpose of today and the agenda. So why we have invited you all today is to introduce you to our free choice learning activity, which is a new piece of research that we've been developing for quite a while now that we're really, really excited about. Today, we are going to be giving you an overview of what that learning activity is. We're going to explain a little bit about how the activity will work and how you can take part in it. We're going to explain why we're doing this learning activity and highlight how important it is, and how the results from this activity are going to feed into lots of exciting work. And then we are, as I've said, going to do a short Q&A session about the learning activity before we wrap up and tell you how you can take part, and a few more events that we'll be doing to get you up to speed with what you need to do. So I am going to hand you over to Lewis Rimmer, who is our learning lead for SFI Pilot Scheme Content and Design, and he is going to talk to you about giving you an overview of what the free choice learning activity is.
Good morning, everyone. So without meaning to teach our grannies how to suck eggs, an important part of this is that when you all join the SFI Pilot, you joined based on our 8 standards that we had. And these standards are, as you know, essentially groups of environmental actions that have been bundled together. And you selected which standards you wanted in your agreements. However, in June, DEFRA announced that they, for SFI 23, will move away from this standards approach and move towards a more pick and mix structure where you'll be able to select individual actions. And essentially, we want to get a better understanding of how that change will impact uptake and opinions and everything that goes alongside this type of scheme. And the pilot provides the perfect opportunity to test this, because you guys have already done one of those options. You've already done the standard stuff, and now we want to ask you to do the other option. So we've teamed up with farming and countryside programmes behavioural science and analytics team, who I'll introduce later. And we've also teamed up with an external contractor, Kantar Public, who are a kind of leading social research agency. And what we're going to ask you to do as part of your regular pilot learning is to complete a mock reapplication based on individual actions rather than standards. The actions that you'll be shown have come directly from the SFI Pilot standards. The only difference is you'll be able to pick and mix rather than being confined to the standard. So, you know, you could, if you wanted to, you could pick every action that's in a standard, or you could pick only one. It's completely up to you. Sorry, next slide. But there's one important bit that I just need to highlight. Next slide, please. That despite we've made a real effort to make this look and feel like a real application portal, but this does not constitute a change to your live SFI pilot agreement, and it does not reflect a transition to SFI 23, and it's not an early look at SFI 23. This has been completely created for the purposes of this study. This is a learning activity only, so treat it like one, but we do also, you know, want you to get stuck in as if it were like a real application. And also your responses to this study will not impact your ability to join any future schemes, and the results from it will only ever be shared anonymously. Next slide, please. So payment rates is something to highlight. So when you originally joined the pilot, you were shown a payment rate for a whole standard at whichever level of ambition you chose. So for example, £29 a hectare per year for the introductory level of ambition for the improved grassland standard. But for this learning activity, because we've separated all the actions out, you'll be shown a payment rate for each individual action. However, due to the way that payment rates for individual actions within standards were calculated, some of these payment rates will appear low and some of them are zero. And furthermore, similar or sometimes very similar actions carry a different payment rate depending on the type of land they're applied to. That this obviously, you know, is not ideal, but this is a really prime opportunity to tell us when something is not right. So, you know, if you end up not selecting something because of the payment rate, that tells us a really clear signal. So, yeah. Next slide, please, Liz. So I'll just pass back to Sophie to explain a little bit about how the actual learning activity will work.
Hi again. I realised that I should have introduced myself at the start, which I didn't. So I'm Sophie Braithwaite and I'm the head of pilot learning. Apologies. So before you start the activity, you're going to receive an email from the SFI Pilot team, just like any of our other surveys or our newsletters that you've received, and it's going to have a link to start the study. In that email will also be a link to the recording of this webinar. So if you want to rewatch any bits of it, you can do that. And anybody who wasn't able to make it today can catch up before they start. And we really recommend that everybody does that. So once the study goes live, which will be next week, you will have 2 full weeks to complete it. So 14 days from when we send you the link. Just a couple of important bits. We can only accept 1 response per SBI. So we've had it in the past when we've sent surveys where we've had multiple survey responses for the same SBI. And that is because sometimes multiple people are involved in pilot learning for a single SBI. And sometimes people have just forgotten that they've completed a survey and they submit it again, which is absolutely fine. And we normally kind of clean up all of those responses and work out which one we need to use for our analysis. But for this activity, we have built in that we only accept 1 response. So as soon as you press submit on the kind of application system, you won't be able to go back in and put your SBI in and do it again. If you're an agent and you're representing multiple SBIs, we do not want you to complete the study multiple times for all of the different SBIs that you're representing. There's a very good reason for that, which Jonathan might talk about in a little bit. But so we're just asking, if you do have multiple SBIs that you represent, that you choose one SBI to complete the study for. And we would like that to be the SBI that has the most pilot content in the agreement. So kind of the most standards, the highest levels of ambition. And if other agreement holders that you represent, the other SBIs that you're not completing the activity for, would like to be involved, then they can, of course, complete the study themselves without your input. So that I think that's everything that we need to know about multiple SBIs. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So during the study, some parts of the study are going to look a little bit different for different participants. We are testing a few different things with this study. We ask that you don't discuss the content of the study with other participants until after it's closed, because that might bias and affect the quality of the results we get. You should recognize all of the actions and the guidance in the study, because they're exactly the same as what you applied for in the pilot. As Lewis has said, they're just not combined to standards. They're all of the same actions that you're familiar with, just separated out. So there shouldn't be the need to do quite as much reading as when you applied for the SFI pilot, but all of that same information is available to you if you would like to refresh, or if there are kind of new actions that you might be considering that you haven't applied for in the SFI pilot. You're going to be asked to say what area or length of eligible land types or features you would like to apply any given action to. So just like when you applied for the SFI pilot, you can only apply actions on a whole parcel basis. So we're recommending that before you enter into the study, you have some information to hand about the size of your parcels in your holding, and also length of features like hedgerows and water bodies, for when you are completing the study and you enter in the amount of land that you want to put against each of the actions. So the study could take you a couple of hours, depending on how many actions you want to apply for, how much reading you want to do, how certain you are of the kinds of things that you would want to apply for. You can pause and restart the study if it's taking a bit longer, if you need to go get some advice or you just want a little break, and then restart by just entering that same SBI that you put in to begin with. The only way that you can keep a record of your responses is by screenshotting the web page at the end. So we get asked in our surveys quite frequently if we can add an option to print out responses, and we know that some participants like to include that in their learning journals and just keep it on record. You don't have to do that at all. Nobody's going to be checking your learning journal to make sure that you have kind of recorded what you put in this study, but if you would like to, then the option of screenshotting is there for you. And I do apologize that we weren't able to kind of build in that functionality of giving you a printout. So next slide, please. I am now going to hand over to Jonathan Woolley, who is going to talk to you about why we're doing this learning activity.
Thanks, Sophie. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Woolley. I am the head of behavioural science and analytics for FCP, which means I sort of specialise, I lead a team of people who specialise in designing these sorts of learning activities. And the reason why we're doing this is because we want to know more about the standards model and the application process, and how moving to a more free choice between actions way of applying will influence and impact your ability to decide between the options that are available. So farmers have already told us through interviews and in writing, for all this kind of co-design that we've been doing and through the pilot, what they want from environmental land management schemes and the application process. This has given us a ton of different ideas and different possible sort of principles we could apply to designing the application process. But we now need to confirm that we've interpreted all of this information that we've received correctly by testing how parts of the service could work in practice with large numbers of farmers. So the key thing to highlight about this is that we're not testing you. There are no right and wrong answers. We want you to sort of interact with this sort of dummy application process as if it was the real thing, and just give your sort of honest reactions based on that. There are no right and wrong answers, but in giving those sort of those sorts of by taking part, you're helping us find out if our predictions that we've made based on what you've told us about how the scheme could work are correct, and that will mean that we'll pass those recommendations on right across FCP to ensure that we choose the best possible designs as we iterate our schemes moving forward, but also that we also help our policymakers plan the delivery of everything that FCP is doing overall. So it's a really, really valuable activity to be able to sort of test some of these things at scale. We're doing this after the announcement that SFI 2023 is moving away from standards, because our schemes are iterative, and we're going to continue gathering evidence for future improvements in the schemes. We were also a bit concerned that if we did this before the SFI 2023 announcement happened, that it might cause a bit of confusion between what was going to be in the actual announcement and just what's in the context of what exists in the context of this experiment. So we thought we'd avoid that by waiting until all of the information about SFI 23 is out there, and then we could just run this experiment in as a sort of a separate thing. Hopefully and hopefully that if you want to find out more about SFI 23, all the information is now available, obviously, online. Next slide, please. So the reason why we're asking you not to discuss the study with each other until it has finished is because it's generally just good research practice to do that, so that we keep the study fair and true. If you're all talking to each other about what you're experiencing, you might get sort of that might influence the way in which you interact with the application process by the time it comes for you to do it. Obviously, in real life, we wouldn't be giving people slightly different application forms, so that would make this learning experience sort of, quite different to what the reality of what you interacting with our schemes and applying for different actions would look like. So we want to try and make this as similar to a real application process as possible, so it's a fairer test. So that's why, in a sense, we just want people to be going and looking at it and getting your sort of immediate reactions to what you see. In a real study, if this was sort of like a sort of a test done in a kind of university setting, you'd all be completing it at the same time. But obviously, we can't do that with such a large population. So that's why we're asking you to help us out by just waiting until the study is finished before you talk to each other about what about your experiences. The reason why we're showing you 0 or low payment rates is because we need to be able to compare the results from this learning activity to what you selected when you entered the pilot. And therefore, we need to use the same payment calculations that we used at the beginning there. So if that's something that does affect what you would do or what you wouldn't choose to do in terms of actions in the SFI pilot, this is a really great way to tell us that by just making your selection of actions accordingly. And that is the same principle throughout. So if there's any stage in this dummy application process where you see something and you think, oh, that's not great at all, then this test is a great opportunity for you to let us know, and we'll take that into account with the iteration of our services. It's really important that you're honest. It's really important that we get accurate insight into which actions you choose and how much land you'd apply them to, because effectively we just want to make sure that the application process is designed so that it's as easy as possible for you to do to develop the best agreement possible for your business. And this is a great way of doing that. Next slide, please. So we're now moving on to a Q&A session with me and Sophie. So we'll be picking questions out of the chat, and I think Liz will be helping us with that. So over to you guys.
There's also chat in the Q&A box as well.
I think what we also may do is just where we've already answered a couple of questions in the Q&A function, we'll just voice those over so people who are watching back get the benefit of those answers as well. So Lewis, is there anything that you think would be good for us?
So one from Richard Wharton, I understand that hedge length is now real rather than as mapped by the RPA. Can we use real measurements in this study? And the answer is yes, you can enter real area and length of features that you would have put in any of these actions. And if you don't know the exact, no one is checking, no one from the RPA is going to check your answers or anything like that. Just use your best guess. So, if you think it's around 110 meters of hedge or whatnot, just put in 110. Yeah.
I would add to that as well. We know when you're going to be applying for new schemes, it can be really, really burdensome to check all of the information that the RPA holds about you and make sure that the parcel sizes are all correct and the hedgerow lengths are all correct and it's not being remapped without your consent, and then you have to go through all the hassle of the paperwork. So in a real life situation, that would be a huge amount of work. For this, just assume that the length and the area that you know that your farm is, we agree that that is the length and that you can, and the area, and you can enter exactly what you want into any of the actions.
We also have one here from Martin saying, in the study, can I add actions beyond what is in the initial standard-based agreement? And again, the answer is yep. That's essentially the whole point. If you want to remove a particular action from a standard or add in particular actions, this is entirely up to you. You have, as the study is named, free choice over which actions you place in your agreement.
We'll just add to that as well. Sorry. You can add in actions beyond what is in your particular agreement. The scope of all of the 8 standards is open to you, but then there are no actions beyond those 8 standards, just in case we're kind of misinterpreting what that question was asking.
Another one that we've have also answered in the chat is, are you willing to pay for this if an agent did an agreement originally? And the answer is no. This is covered under our the learning payment that you all receive as pilot participants. And now there are quite a lot of questions flowing into the main unanswered bit.
So there is one from Ian. Are you happy your software is up to keeping the applications as we go? Over the last 2 years, I've completed a few surveys that have then been lost or not recorded as completed on your system, which is really frustrating when you invest time and effort to complete accurately. That sounds incredibly frustrating. I really apologize if your responses to surveys have been lost or missed by us. We are, as we've said, we've been working with a partner, Kantar Public, to deliver this activity, and they have kind of developed a little application portal, mock application portal for us to complete this study. It is different to all of the software that we've used to do learning with you previously, so hopefully we are not going to have those issues this time. I've had a little sneak preview of what this will look like for you, and done a few test runs. It looks absolutely brilliant, and we're really confident that that will be able to record all of the information that you provide us, and lead to us getting some really exciting results that we can feed into the future of our green environment schemes. But yeah, I really do apologise if particularly anyone other than Ian has had that experience. We'll definitely take that on board and have a look at how we deliver surveys in the future.
And just to come in on that, Sophie, like one of the reasons why we're working with Kantar as an external contractor on this project is because they have like purpose-built systems for doing this kind of work. They do it for a wide variety of clients across the public and private sector. It's very tried, it's very tested. So the risk of data being lost in that way is really low. And so we've I think one of the reasons why it's really good to sort of bring in those sorts of expertise is because they're very good at what they do. So yes.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm just going to pick out another question. With the SFI 23 handbook already published, is this research from the study going to have any real purpose at a later date? Which is a really good question. And I know that that's a frustration that a lot of participants feel when you're participating in the SFI Pilot, which feels quite fixed and content is just being rolled out live all of the time. And you can see the schemes being developed and changed and are not always confident that what we're doing is feeding into that. But we have, I think Jonathan as well, I'd really like you to come in on this because you've been talking and working really closely with our policy teams, but we have been working with the Farming and Countryside programme to dock in with all of the development they're doing and understand how our study can really influence schemes in the future, and the impacts of the research that the findings that we're going to be getting from this research are beyond SFI. This will influence countryside stewardship in the future and any kind of new agri-environment schemes that we roll out throughout the agricultural transition. Jonathan, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really great question, and I can totally understand why people who are participating in the pilot, which feels like a lot of the way it was set up kind of was at an earlier stage of the development of our various schemes and services. And you're seeing kind of the sort of so much progress being made on SFI Live. I can fully understand why it might seem a little bit unclear how they do feed in, but they do feed in. I've been had a front row seat on how insights from the pilot have been flowing into thinking that officials have around how our live schemes need to operate, and weighing up the different ways in which we can design our offer. Basically, I think the other key thing to remember is that there are things beyond the handbook which are really relevant to how schemes might work. So whether or not that's the way that the actual application form itself is structured, for example, is something which we're constantly working with the RPA to improve. Understanding areas which land managers find particularly frustrating or difficult when they're managing an agreement. All of that kind of stuff is stuff that we are constantly improving and constantly iterating. And this learning activity is designed to help inform all of that. So me and my team, once we've got this once we've got the results from this piece of work, and we've had a proper full debrief with you guys, we'll be making sure all of those insights are fed into not just policy teams who are making decisions about the direction of travel with SFI and CS and other schemes, but also the teams in the RPA and in DEFRA who are actually building the application processes and the way we provide, as we structure our guidance online, and the way that we provide you with information, and we'll be making sure that that's all made available to all those different teams across DEFRA. So rest assured, the results of this experiment are going to have lots and lots of impacts that potentially within the iteration of SFI as time goes on, but also right across everything that we do with farmers. Thanks, Sophie.
We've got a couple of questions here as well about the payment rates, if you two would like to come in. The questions essentially say, is anybody likely to sign up to an action with a zero payment rate? And we're being asked, to be honest, would anyone select an option with zero payment rate? So, Jonathan, I don't know if you want to.
So I really see that comment. I am not sure why anybody would sign up to an option with a zero payment rate. Maybe if you were already doing that action as part of your normal farming practice, and you wanted your SFI agreement to kind of reflect that good work that you're already doing. But equally, it's completely reasonable that if you weren't explicitly paid for an action, that you wouldn't want to sign up to it through SFI. So as Lewis has said, if you see those zero payment rate actions and you don't want to take them up, and you think it's not reasonable for that payment rate to be low or zero, then this study is a really great way to tell us that, and to tell us that in a way that we'll have bigger data on, rather than just kind of verbal feedback. It's a really powerful way for us to share that feedback with the rest of the department. And just in terms of why there might be zero payment rates, as some people have mentioned, the calculation that was used to create the payment rates for the SFI pilot actions was income forgone plus costs. So these payment rates were calculated years ago, and I know that new rates for similar actions in SFI 23 and beyond are different, and the kind of calculations have been updated, so might not reflect what's in the pilot. But if there is an action that our economists think will improve farm profitability, then that income forgone will be much lower. So that's a potential reason that payment rates might be low or zero. If the action is something that is kind of normal farming practice, or even really close to regulation, then that's another reason that payment rate might be low or zero, we don't think that that's kind of going to be much income foregone, because it's not a deviation from things that you would already be doing. Lots of reasons, but rest assured that in future schemes, we'll never encounter a zero payment rate. We just need to keep those payment rates as zero, because when all of the actions are bundled together into standards, some of those actions were calculated at that level. And we need to be able to compare what you enter into this study with your original kind of pilot applications. Jonathan, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. I think the other thing to except I think the other thing I would sort of mention is that as civil servants, we have a real duty to make sure that all of our recommendations and decisions are evidence-based, which is why we sort of rely on some of the processes that Sophie has mentioned for calculating what a payment rate is. And that is because ultimately we're accountable to taxpayers, including everybody on this call. And we want to make sure that we're spending money, we're required to make sure we're spending public money effectively. And so there's certain principles that you have to apply, and we also have to collect evidence to sort of back up the decisions that we make. And that will involve a wide range of evidence. So sometimes when you're starting out, you might want to do qualitative research through sort of co-design or workshops to explore the issues involved. But then it's also important to collect, more data at a population scale to check that your kind of working hypotheses, if you like, about how things need to look are correct. So that before you're at a stage where you've sort of made lots of decisions that cost a lot of money to implement, and then you start getting when you start sort of using them at scale with lots and lots of farms, that's what problems appear that didn't turn up in your qualitative work. It's much better to just try and test that earlier on. And I think this is one of the reasons, and that applies to the application process, and I think it also applies to setting payment rates as well. So I think this will be a really interesting. We'll certainly be using the data from this study to look at learning lessons from why sort of how effective or not a zero payment rate is as a component of an offer.
So I just want to jump in and answer a couple of quick questions as well. So what are the eligibility criteria for the land entered into the test? Every action will have the eligibility criteria shown alongside it, and these eligibility criteria are identical to those of the pilot, but on an action by action basis. So you'll have to make that decision about eligibility yourself as you go through the study. And then the second one, is the mock application based on the original application or the one that I amended last year or the one that I intend to amend for this year? Neither. This has been designed from scratch entirely and solely for the purpose of this study. So it might look a bit different to anything you've seen before. It looks a bit similar to what has been in the pipeline for SFI 23, as you guys have seen. But yeah, it's specifically designed for this. And another question that I've just seen has been asked as well is, are you limited to land that's already in your pilot agreement? And the answer is no. You can use your whole farm. And it's really important that you consider your whole farm in this, because we want to see whether, when you're not constrained by standards, whether you would expand certain actions to bigger areas or longer lengths of hedge when you're not constrained and when you have that freedom of choice. Look for more.
There's another question that I would like to pick up, which is from an anonymous attendee. Will the options selected during the study be added to our current pilot agreement, or is this study purely hypothetical and have no bearing on our actual agreement options? This is purely hypothetical. Anything that you select will not be added to your agreement or taken out of your agreement. It's just a learning activity. So no impact whatsoever on your agreement that you're currently delivering.
There's a question I'd like to pick out, which is there's been people have been asking, a couple of people have asked if you accept a zero, and this, but I'll pick up Patrick Clarkson's response, which is, if you accept a zero payment rate option, are you exposing yourself to inspections or penalties? I can't answer for how that would work in the SFI pilot itself, but obviously because this is a hypothetical experiment, you wouldn't, if you selected it, you obviously wouldn't be inspected or subject to any penalties. But if this was for real and that would be a concern, then obviously don't select that option would be my recommendation. And then we have a really clear, but maybe Sophie or Lewis can talk about the live pilot and how it would have worked.
Yeah, I would echo that. For this whole exercise, we want you to treat it as if it was a real application. And so you would assume that anything that you select for an agri-environment scheme would have some level of kind of monitoring or inspection that goes alongside that. But this is a hypothetical activity, so you don't have to be worried that anything that you select will actually be inspected or monitored. So yeah, as Jonathan has said, take those things into consideration. In a real life situation, if you wouldn't select action, don't select it in the study. In a real life situation, if you think you might give it a go, then add it in. But no, I think Jonathan, you covered that pretty well. Thank you. There is a question that I have seen that has just disappeared from my screen because the chat is moving around. But I think the essence of the question was, this participant has dry stone walls, and will they be able to select any actions for dry stone walls in this activity? So in this activity, the only actions that you can select are from SFI Pilot standards. So we don't have any specific dry stone wall standard, so you won't be able to select any kind of new actions that cater for those different types of features. As actual live schemes that aren't part of our hypothetical study are rolled out, and there will be options for you to enter into in live schemes way beyond what is available to you in the pilot. And we have heard through a lot of learning activities we've done over the last year or so that dry stone walls are a real big gap of our learning, of our pilot offer, and we fed that back to policy teams. But yeah, in this study, the only things that will be available to you are standards that are already part of the pilot.
I've seen one here from Finley. Have you replaced the term improved grassland with something more comprehensible? No, we haven't changed any of the terminology unless it relates to standards or levels of ambition. So essentially all we've done is taken the pilot as it is, but deconstruct it into its building blocks. So the terminology of improved grassland, low and no input grassland, etc., they're all the same. It's just that they're not confined to standards.
There are a couple of questions that look quite similar across the chat, which is about using your whole farm for the study. Is that limited by existing old agri-environment agreements? So what we're saying is that you're not limited to land that you've already entered into the pilot. If you've got land on your farm that's outside of the pilot that you think you would have included, if you could select individual actions, then you can include that land. But the eligibility criteria that applies to the pilot as a whole still would apply. So if you have land in other kind of schemes that made your land ineligible for the pilot, we'd ask you not to include that land in this hypothetical scenario as well. And we will, I think we should clarify that in the communications that we send out when we send the link to this exercise. So I'll just make a note of us to confirm that. And I've just realised there was something that I wanted to voice over in the presentation, which I didn't, which is that when an agent is choosing which SBI that they complete the activity for, the SBIs that were not selected by that agent, those agreement holders can of course complete this exercise, but they will not be disadvantaged by not being chosen by the agent. So we will still credit those SBIs with kind of learning hours, because that's out of your control, and kind of the opportunity has been taken away from you. So those people won't be disadvantaged. Anonymous attendee has said, I'm assuming that if this were a real offer and application, the zero payment options would not be there because someone with sense would have realized how pointless they are. It's a great point. And you know, that is something that standards allow us to do. It's a bundle of different actions together with a whole payment rate. When you look at individual actions, you have to price those individually, and low and zero payment actions we wouldn't be able to add to an actual scheme offer, but we are comparing what you choose in this activity to the standards that you chose, which is why those zero payments are there.
There's just two questions I'd like to pull out, actually. One is, will you have an opportunity to explain why you chose what you chose? And yes, you will. So there's going to be a questionnaire around the actual dummy application itself, which will give you lots of opportunities to actually feedback on on how you found the process. I'd also like to just sort of repeat maybe for people who've just joined the call, the purpose of this experiment is basically to test different ways of applying for SFI agreements. We've obviously, with the SFI Pilot, it was based on standards. Now under SFI 23, we're moving towards like a pick and mix approach. And the key question we have is, that's a very different type of experience, right? If you're on a website and you've got to scroll down and click, a certain number out of 8 different standards, that's very different to if you're shown a long list of actions and you have to look at all of them. Basically, in terms of just the interaction you have with the application process, it's going to look different. So, and it's going to feel different. And we want to understand what impact that has on you. We want to understand, whether or not it might make it harder, whether or not it might make it easier, and whether or not different things that we're currently thinking about ways of making it easier, making it clearer, whether or not those techniques that we're looking at work for large numbers of farmers, which is basically what. So this is essentially, having learned the lessons that we've learned from the pilot, we're now looking at making iterations to our live schemes. But if you just made those iterations to those live schemes, obviously, if we ended up making an iteration that actually didn't work for a big section of the farming population, then that might have quite significant consequences. It might expose them, for example, to risk of inspections, or it might mean that they didn't put in for an agreement at all because they found it too complicated. We want to avoid doing that, which is why we're doing this kind of hypothetical exercise first, because obviously if you spend a bit of time and helping us learn these lessons as we're making these tweaks, then or as we're thinking about making tweaks over the longer term, we'll be able to learn better about whether or not those sorts of modifications will help farmers or would cause problems. And we want to spot any of those problems before it might have an effect on an actual live agreement. As Sophie has said, this is a hypothetical exercise and it won't affect any of your live agreements. So essentially, if there are if there's anything encountered in this experiment that would have a negative impact, it's not going to. So this is like a safe way of testing ideas that we have, and the ideas that are discussed internally. They're not being integrated into any live schemes imminently, which is why we're testing them now. So hopefully that makes sense. And if anyone else has any further questions about that, I'm very happy to answer them.
We've got a question in the non-Q&A from Roy saying, as it's hypothetical, why not have an option for suggesting other actions not previously in the pilot standards? And that's a really interesting and good point. The reason being is basically for the kind of the research design of this, we couldn't change too much, otherwise it wouldn't be a fair comparison to what you originally suggested at the start of the pilot, and that's why the actions you'll be shown here are the same. But that is a really interesting point and possibly something we could look at in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Sophie. I'll just hop in quickly. We are actually potentially going to be doing more sort of tests like this. So if this goes well. And it is quite a new way of testing things from DEFRA, right? So we've previously used surveys, and we've used workshops, and we've used piloting and testing and trialing. This is a new way of testing things, and if it doesn't work, then we will obviously learn lessons from that. So we're partly road testing the approach, the methodology for this learning activity, as well as actually testing the application process as well. So it's kind of a road test of two things. So yeah, this is but if it does go well and we do get really interesting results from it, and it works well for you as well, then what we will do is we'll do additional experiments and additional sort of learning activities like this that kind of test out different modifications that are kind of on the drawing board, as it were, so that we can learn more about them. And I think that's and that's a really good idea. That's a really good suggestion, actually, for something you could put into this sort of framework, right? Is like giving people the option of adding additional actions and so forth. But in order to get good results from this one, so that we can compare standards against kind of the pick and mix approach, in a fair way, you need the same. You need to keep things the same across those different variations.
I would just add to that as well. Agree, it's a really great suggestion, and I'm just aware of a lot of the other comments saying this seems, the application to begin with took a lot of time, worried that this survey will be burdensome. We've put a lot of effort into making sure that the application in this study is really simple compared to what you experienced at the start. But we are mindful that this is going to take a bit of time. We're going to be crediting you those learning hours, but adding in lots of extra things to think about is potentially quite a lot for a single learning activity. And we really want as many people as possible to complete this because it's really important. We're really excited about how the results of this could be used. So we want to make it easy and low burden. But if people do have suggestions for other actions that they think are missing from the SFI pilot standards, every time we do a learning activity on standards, we try to ask you, what's missing? What extra things would you like to be paid for? What are you already doing that the standard doesn't compensate? And we have taken on board that feedback and we've passed it on to policy teams. But there's always going to be more opportunities for you to give us that feedback outside of this activity, in another activity that you'll also get learning time for. So hopefully you'll participate in that, and rest assured that we do collect all of that feedback and try and give it to the right people across the department. There is another question that I'd really like to pick up, which is, may I also suggest that for the real system, there is a sandbox facility so that you can enter a draft, see what it would pay, and then amend before submitting. It's a really great suggestion. In this activity, you will see that when you select actions and you enter how much land you want to enter into, you can press submit, and then you get a summary page that tells you everything that you've submitted and the total value of your agreement. And then you can go back and deselect or add new things in. I am fairly confident that that is a feature that would be included in future application systems. I'm a bit nervous of saying that because I don't develop those systems, but that's a really, really great suggestion.
And just to say, if you like, as I say, in the context of the questionnaire, it might be that you might want to mention that in the context of some of the questions, and if you do, and in fact, the fact that you mentioned it now, we'll definitely log that as a proposal, and we might also take that to some of our delivery colleagues who are working with those schemes, and suggest that we run another testing activity to see how that might perform. So it's great that you're. So thank you for making that suggestion. And in fact, this has already given me loads of ideas about future experiments to test out different kind of modifications to the application process that we could set up. So different new kind of road tests. So this has been really, really helpful. So thank you all for all these suggestions. They're really good.
A couple more questions. What happens if we look through all of the options and decide we wouldn't want to enter any land into this variation of the scheme? You can do that through the experiment. You can not select anything and press submit, and that be your application. And then you can tell us in the little questionnaire at the end why you haven't put anything into the scheme. And that is a completely valid response to this activity and really interesting. And we want to know if that's how you feel. So if you do feel that way, please do complete the activity and tell us that you wouldn't want to put any land into this variation of the scheme.
Absolutely. Like, and I also want to just to kind of emphasize Sophie's point there. Like, even we're not there's no particular outcome that we're looking for from this. Like, there is no, when I say there is no right or wrong answer, I really mean that. Like, we want to know how you're completely honest, sort of unvarnished, like, reactions to what to the sort of the sort of dummy application processes that we built, because and you can, the thing is that your reactions here at this point will be, can be captured and then fed into all the kind of work we're doing to kind of improve and iterate our services moving forward, right? And so if you look at something and think, oh, that's absolutely terrible, but then you don't take part, then that reaction won't have been captured. And so if this really looks, if we run this experiment and everyone to test out these application processes, we run this test and the result is no one fills out an application and then they tell us why, then that's really, really interesting, right? It won't be a failure of the experiment. That'll be a result that we can hand over to key decision makers in DEFRA and to really encourage them to make things sort of better in future. So please be honest, even if what your reaction is, oh, I don't like that, or I really don't like zero payment rates, or this is really confusing, or whatever else it is, no matter, just tell us, because it's only when you tell us that we can actually take that forward to our bosses and the key decision makers, and then they can make an informed decision about how we build our services moving forward. So your participation is so invaluable. So please tell us honestly, and fill out the application form with, as you would if it was live.
Sophie and Jonathan, this question has come up a couple more times, so it'd be good if you could just explain a bit more about why it is. So are there likely to be any zero rate actions in the real scheme? And if not, what is the point in having them in this activity?
Okay, so no, you will not in the real world in a future scheme be given a zero payment action. So in the standards, some of the actions are low or zero payment rates, and they also, in a level of ambition for a standard, you might have 2 actions that pay really highly and 1 action that's 0 or very low, and you just see the overall payment rate for that. When you break them apart, you see that's a 0 payment rate. We need to be able to compare the idea of a standard with the idea of options. And we're comparing the idea of an option through this study with your original agreement. So you selected potentially a level of ambition with a 0 payment rate, but if you could have seen the individual options and selected them, you may not have picked that 0 payment rate. So now we're comparing the idea of an option to the idea of a standard. We have to show you that 0 payment rate and give you the option of saying, I really wouldn't have done that. So it feels completely counterintuitive, but it's because we're comparing to the actual pilot agreements that you have. And I know, yeah, it feels counterintuitive, it feels frustrating, it feels like maybe why would anyone select that? And we'll see through this study. I don't want to bias the results by predicting what people may or may not select, but that's for you to tell us through completing the study, and for us to learn from and take on board. But yeah, in real life, you'll not be asked to do something for 0 payment.
There's a quick one here that I can answer as well. I hope you've made it simple to identify fields and hedges, or maybe minimal effort will be made to comply with the application. So there's no mapping functionality in this application. You will just be able to enter in a text box the area or length of a feature that you want to apply to an action. So you won't have to look through a map. If you know that you want to enter 2 fields that are 20 hectares each into an action, then you just put 40 hectares into the text box, and it will calculate the payment rate for you based on that.
I have one more question I want to answer before we move on to just the final bit of the webinar. If Jonathan or Lewis, you have any other single questions that you want to pick out before we move on, then feel free to take a look while I answer this question, and then we'll give you some more information about what's going to happen. So the question that I've just picked out is, many actions stopped us from applying for higher ambition levels. Can we just not select those actions and apply for higher levels? Yes, absolutely. So loads of the feedback that we've received about the idea of a standard is that I really would have gone into the higher ambition level, but there's just one thing that's stopping me. In this activity, you could find those actions that were part of that higher ambition level and select everything you want, but just the one action that was stopping you going into that ambition level, you don't have to add it. And that's the difference really between an options approach and a standards approach. Jonathan, is there any kind of final question that you want to pick up? I also want to mention that we will be going through all of these questions and trying to answer them and adding them to a Q&A that we will give to you if we weren't able to answer them today. If not, no, okay. Liz,
Actually, there's one question here. It's how will entering whole farm area enable comparison with our SFI pilot, which is only part of the farm? Most of our other land is in mid-tier stewardship. The reason being, you may decide just to apply these mock actions to exactly the same area of your farm, but it may have been the case that you felt constrained by the standards and only kept them on a smaller part of your farm when you originally applied. But when you have free choice of the actions, it may be that people decide to extend those actions over a broader element of their farm, or they might constrict it even further. That's why we're giving you the ability to do that. It gives us a better understanding of how you would have changed your application when you had pick and mix against standards.
And just to kind of add one more thing, so I think just to kind of manage people's expectations as well, this won't be a full application process that you'd go through end to end. This is mainly just focusing upon the stage where you decide what actions you do. So, and we also won't be, as Sophie and Lewis mentioned previously, we won't be asking you to kind of assign actions to a map. So there's no sort of mapping component. It's literally just sort of the decision component. So it's a little piece of the overall application process. We are doing lots of testing on all of the other aspects of an application. So whether or not it's updating your spatial details with the RPA, or whether or not that's monitoring an agreement that's already been submitted. We are doing testing on all of those as well. We may end up running sort of like tests a bit like this one with different those components in future. But yes, this is just focusing specifically on the actual decision between all the different actions stage of the website.
Just before Sophie brings it to a close, I've just got another quick one that I can answer. Some of the actions within the pilot were one-off actions. For example, the woodland condition assessment. Will they be included? And if we've already done them, should we select them again? As this is hypothetical, so all of the actions that were in the pilot have been included, even the one-off ones. And as this is hypothetical, essentially, if you would do them again, yes, select them. Yeah, that's the answer.
Okay, I'm gonna try and move us on to the final bit of the webinar so that we finish on time. So if we can just move on to the next slide, please, Liz.
Just to check, can you see the full green version there?
Yes, yeah, I've got it, thank you. So there have been loads of questions, so thank you so much for kind of being so interested and asking us those questions. I didn't expect us to take up the full time slot, so really great to see so many people so engaged. And I'm completely aware that you might have more questions, and when you open the study, that you might also need to talk to us a bit more and ask more questions before you feel confident and comfortable to press submit and finish it. So we are going to be running a series of virtual drop-in sessions that will answer any more questions that you have after the study is live. We're going to be holding 4 of these, so 2 on Thursday, the 28th of September, from 10 o'clock in the morning until 10:30, and then the second one from 10:45 until 11:45. And then we've got 2 more on Thursday, the 5th, from 12 o'clock noon until 30:30, and then from 12:45 until 1:15. You don't need to join the sessions. We will notify you when they're open, and if you want to sign up to get some more support, please do. And if we just move on to the next slide, please. Just to say again, thank you so much for turning up to the webinar. Thank you for all of your questions. We'll get back to you on any questions that we weren't able to answer. Thank you preemptively for giving the activity a shot and a go. We're really excited to see what you tell us through this activity. If you have any questions, please email us at sfipilotlearning@defra.gov.uk. And now we're just going to do a pop-up poll, which asks you how useful you found the webinar. if you think that participating in this webinar has made you feel more confident about being able to do the study, then please let us know. And thank you again, and please enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks, Sophie. We'll just give another 30 seconds for the poll before we close the webinar.